Hey everybody, it's Dave here. Time for another tech vlog. It's been a while, sorry about that. You can probably tell from the surroundings that I'm not in the Edinburgh flat anymore. We've actually moved house, we're in North Wales, well we've moved country. We're in North Wales now. So new house, Helen started a new job. I'm working from this desk right here, full time now, which is new for me. No co-working spaces anymore. And we've got a dog as well, so there's been a lot of change. But one thing that hasn't changed is my interest in Docker, so I've been really excited to get back to this series and be able to do another video. We got some really nice feedback on the previous video, so I thought we'd pick up where we left off really and keep learning together. So just to quickly recap, what we spoke about in the previous video was my Ruby on Rails app and how it could be bundled together into a Docker container. And if you remember, that whole process is defined here in the Docker file. So you explain how you go from this base image, which is just a base image with Ruby 2.6.5, and all the different things you have to build and install, commands you have to run, including the final command to actually start the Rails server. So this file gets your Rails app into a container. That's really good. But it's not entirely helpful by itself. Your Rails app needs other things, for example, a database to talk to. And so we have this file called the Docker Compose file, and that allows you to compose multiple images together into everything you need really to serve your Ruby on Rails app. So of course one of those requirements is the Rails app itself, but then also your database here, which is running the latest version of Postgres. And even in my case, I've got an Nginx reverse proxy that's serving up SSL certificates. So the outside world doesn't connect directly to the Rails app. It connects to the Nginx server first, and that sets up an SSL connection, makes sure everything's nice and secure, and then it forwards the request backwards, hence a reverse proxy, to the Ruby on Rails server. So these two files are really important. And if you haven't seen the previous video, it might be worth watching it just so you can follow along with this today. But today we're taking things just another step further, and we're going to focus on this file here, GitLab CI. So I'm not sure if we've mentioned GitLab yet. It's very similar to GitHub. In fact, it's basically identical to GitHub, which I think most people have used or at least heard of. It's a web interface for Git, essentially. So it makes it easy for you to see your code and to compare two different versions of code and all that good stuff. But what GitLab has as well is a Docker registry, which is really helpful for storing your Docker images, and also a CI pipeline, a continuous integration pipeline, which is basically just an infrastructure that allows you to set up things that will happen that will be triggered based upon certain events. So for example, I can say whenever I make a change to the master branch in Git, therefore in GitLab, then I want you to go ahead and build a brand new version of the Rails app because the source code's just changed. So yeah, go ahead and build a brand new version of the Rails app and then bring down the old Rails app and bring up the new Rails app. So using some Docker compose commands as well. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. I can write some code, I can push it to GitLab, and as if by magic, the things that I've just added appear on the internet for the people who are visiting the website to benefit from. So that's what we're going to focus on. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is get ourselves a server on the internet that's set up with Docker, and that's going to be the server that actually runs our website 24/7. In the previous video, we were just doing everything locally here on my laptop, which is fine for development, but obviously I don't want my laptop to be a server on the internet. It's not turned on all the time. The internet does go up and down here a little bit, so we need to have a dedicated computer on the internet that's running our Docker images for us. So there are loads of different ways you can do this. There's companies that'll set them up for you. There's things like Kubernetes. I honestly haven't explored half of them. What I did to get myself started was I went to a website called RackNerd just by doing some Googling, and these guys offer very well priced virtual private servers. So I pay a very small amount every year, and they just lend me a server that is entirely mine to do with what I please. So it doesn't come set up with Docker. So it's like, okay, maybe I'm going to have to install Docker and maintain Docker myself. And then I discovered a really good tool, which was really a bit of a breakthrough with this whole process. The tool's called Docker Machine. It's an official tool by Docker. You can see we're in the docker.com website here. And what it allows you to do is just say, hey, I would like a machine on the internet that's running Docker. And if you've got a machine like I did already, then you can point it at that machine. Or if you haven't, you can just go ahead, for example, and give it your DigitalOcean API keys, and it will go and create a Docker machine for you in DigitalOcean. Or if you want to try AWS, Amazon Web Services, then it supports that as well. But as I say, I already had a server on the internet that was accessible via SSH. So the way I got Docker Machine to do its thing was just say Docker Machine create -- driver, but instead of passing in VirtualBox or DigitalOcean, I just passed in generic. And that means it's a generic computer on the internet, connect to it via SSH, and then install Docker. That's it, believe it or not. You wait a few minutes, it does all sorts of jiggery pokery, and then, all being well, your machine on the internet is now running Docker, which is really cool. Okay, so once we've got Docker Machine up and running on our laptop, and we've used it to configure Docker on a remote computer, a remote server, then we can do some pretty clever stuff. So here's a shell that's just running here on my local laptop. And if I type docker ps to list the Docker processes that are running right now, you can see it tells me that I've got 3 different Docker processes up and running, Docker containers. I've got the Mindful app, so that's the Ruby on Rails app. I've got a database that's running Postgres, and an Nginx server. And actually, look at that, the Nginx server has been up for 6 weeks. So that looks like it's running here locally, doesn't it? But my laptop got rebooted this morning. It's certainly not been turned on for 6 weeks. Actually, what we're querying and viewing here is what's running on my server that has been online for 6 weeks, because it's pretty robust. Kudos to RackNerd for that one. So yeah, this is what Docker Machine gives us. We can type now regular Docker commands or Docker compose commands, like we spoke about in the last video, to bring up compositions and bring down compositions. We can use those commands here on this computer, and they'll actually execute on the real server. And if you think about it, that's exactly what we need to be able to orchestrate with CICD. We need to be able to execute commands in GitLab as a result of me pushing code and merging code into master, and to have the effects of those commands actually happen on the real server that's running the Docker engine and hosting the actual website. So how do we make use of Docker Machine within GitLab? Well, the good news is you don't need to install Docker Machine every time you want to run your CI pipeline in GitLab. Actually, what I kind of figured out, and I'm not convinced this is the best way to do it, but it's fairly straightforward. You only have to do it once and it works. So that'll do for me. What Docker Machine is doing when to allow me to execute Docker commands here and have them run somewhere else is it's generating some SSL certificates and also modifying an environment variable called Docker host, which the Docker client on my laptop uses to know where the Docker engine is running. So that's running somewhere on the internet, that gets set in an environment variable, and to keep everything secure and make sure that the whole world can access your remote server, then there's some SSL certificates that are generated. But the good news is once you've generated them, like I've done here on my laptop, you can copy them over into GitLab. And then GitLab can talk to your Docker engine without any issues. So I'm not going to go through all of this in the video because, to be honest, it'd just be me copying a load of gobbledygook out of my console and into GitLab, and on top of that it's all really sensitive, like I'd have to obfuscate it anyway. But just to give you an idea, if I go to cd.docker/machines/machines/racknerd, which is the friendly name that I gave when I set up that remote host in Docker Machine, then you can see there's this ca.pem, so certificateauthority.pem, certificate.pem, so you need those two, I think. And then there's a few other certificates that are in a different location that I've forgotten. Anyway, I'll figure all that out and I'll put it down in the YouTube description below. But once you've copied those files across, then we can start running like Docker compose commands within GitLab, and they'll run and actually execute on the remote Docker host, which is exactly what we want. So let's focus now on the actual GitLab CI config. This is really the interesting stuff, to be honest with you. So a CI pipeline, continuous integration. CD is continuous deployment. Continuous integration is continuously building new versions of your app and integrating all the things that need to integrate together to make it work. And then the CD side, continuous delivery, is taking what you've just built, like the product of your continuous integration, and delivering it, continuously delivering it to the server. So as an engineer, I just push some code, wait a few minutes, and by magic, my Rails app is updated, and my users are hopefully seeing the fruits of my labour. So how do you actually define a GitLab CI file? Well, first thing you do is specify a base image that you would like your CI pipeline to run within. And I'm going to use the Docker Compose base image because if you look down here at the bottom, we're using several Docker Compose commands. So if I can use a base image that has Docker Compose installed, then that's going to help me out. So that's our base image. And then next you define the different stages. So a CI pipeline can have multiple stages. You can have as many as you like, as far as I know. At the minute mine's got 2, a stage to build and a stage to deploy. I'm hoping to add one in the middle, which is a stage to run my test suite. But I haven't got around to that yet. That's probably going to be the next video, spoiler alert. But let's focus on the stages that we have got. So we've got a build stage and a deploy stage. But let's talk about this first, this before script, because the commands in here are going to run before each of the stages. So they're going to run twice. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think they only run once. Sorry, I misspoke there. But they're still going to run before the build and before either the build or the deploy stage run. So what are we doing here? Well, you remember I spoke about those environment variables, those SSL certificates that we need to copy across. Well, as a rule, you don't store your secrets in your code base, because if you've got other engineers collaborating with you on a code base, you give them access to the code, you would also give them access to all of your secrets, and it's pretty difficult to keep a secret when lots of people know it. So what you traditionally do is store your secrets in environment variables, which you can do within GitLab. So if I go into settings and then CICD, because that's what we're working on, go into the variables section, you can see that I've got all these different, you remember those .pem files that we spoke about a minute ago? They're all saved in here as Docker variables. And what's happening in these lines is they're being sucked out of the Docker variable by echoing them out, and then they're being redirected, that's what these arrows do, into the correct location on the file system, so that the Docker client and the Docker Compose client can see them. Okay, so that's what's happening in these 4 lines here. This is basically setting everything up so that when we run Docker commands down here or Docker Compose commands down here, they're actually going to run on the remote server. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So let's talk now about the build stage. So what's build? It's kind of what it sounds like. It's going to build our Rails app whenever we make changes to the source code. So there's 3 steps to this particular stage. The first one is to log in to the Docker registry. And that's because in a minute, you can see here, we're going to push an image to that registry, but you can't push without being logged in. So we're going to do Docker login. -u means I'm going to supply the username. Again, that's sensitive, that's a bit of a secret, so we don't hard code it, we read it from the environment variable. -p means I'm about to pass the password, again from an environment variable. And then finally, this is passing the URL to our Docker registry. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you might have spotted that this CI registry variable is not actually defined anywhere here in my GitLab settings. And that's because this CI registry variable is actually populated automatically by GitLab, because one of the nice things that GitLab gives us is our own private Docker registry where we can store our Docker images. So if you look here, look, packages and registries, container registry. I've got my container registry for this Git repo, and it's got my image for Mindful Choices /app saved within it. So that's a really nice thing that GitLab give you for free. Okay, so we are logged into the GitLab Docker registry. We now need to build the latest version of our Rails app. So let's break that command down. Docker build, that makes sense. But why are we pulling? Like, what do we need to pull here? Well, do you remember that in the previous video we looked at this Docker file? And we discussed how usually the first thing you'll see in a Docker file is a from statement like this, where you specify where you want to start from. In other words, what's the base image that your application, so my Ruby on Rails application, is going to be built upon. And for me, that's this image called Ruby running Ruby version 2.6.5. However, it could be that there's some security issues with that base image that I would quite like to benefit from. If they've been fixed, I'd like to get those fixes each time I build a new version of my Rails app. And that's what the -- pull flag is giving us there. It's saying go and check for a new version of the base image compared to the one that you downloaded last time. And if there is a new version, then please pull it down. Otherwise, just use the version from last time, which is hopefully cached, which will make your build process a bit quicker. The next thing we're going to do is pass in a build arg to the build process, and this is just because my build pipeline, in order to be able to build my Rails image, I need a secret, and that secret is saved within the creds.yaml.encrypted file. It's just a load of gobbledygook because it's encrypted, but GitLab needs to be able to decrypt that encrypted file in order to be able to get some information that it needs to finish the build. So I just pass in the secret to decrypt that file, again through an environment variable called Rails master key. And then finally, when we finish building this image, we're going to tag it. It's going to be tagged as going to the CI registry in the Mindful Choices repo. It's going to be called app, and this is going to be the latest version. Okay, so that command should spit out a new Docker image, and then finally we're going to Docker push that new image to our GitLab Docker registry. Okay, build is complete. So the final piece of the puzzle is actually deploying that new image so that the world can see the benefits of it. So let's break down this deploy script. So the first thing we do, again, is we're going to need to pull down that new Docker image, which means we need to log into the registry again. So you remember how I told you that these commands up here execute before anything else? I'm wondering actually if a nice little refactor would be to move, you see how these lines are duplicated? We could move these two login commands up into the before script, couldn't we? And then get rid of the duplication. So nice little opportunity to refactor there. But yeah, so we're logged into the Docker registry. We are now going to use Docker Compose to pull down the images that we need. So that includes our Rails app that we've just rebuilt, but also the Nginx reverse proxy that we're using and the Postgres database as well. So they'll all get pulled down. If there's anything new, any new versions, you'll get those, which is nice, another benefit of Docker. Okay, and then we're going to use Docker Compose again. We're going to run within the context of the app, so the app container. We're going to start a bash shell, so a command line, and we're going to execute this command here. So bundle exec rake db migrate or bundle exec rake db setup. So what this is handling is there's always this possibility that in the latest release that I've just pushed into GitLab, I've added some new database tables or some new columns to existing tables, in which case I need to migrate the database, which is what this command will do. However, if this is the very first time that we've set up the Rails app on this remote host, then actually the database might not exist at all, in which case trying to migrate it, or checking for migrations, which is what this command is going to do, will actually raise an exception. And that's what we're handling here. So we're going to Try to run this command first, and if it fails, we're going to fall through to actually setting up the database. So yeah, Google saved me with this one really. I thought this was a really neat solution. So at this point we've pulled down our latest images, we've updated the database or created the database depending on what needed to happen. So now we're going to use Docker Compose to stop the containers that are currently running because they're still running the outdated Docker images. So we'll do Docker Compose stop. And then finally, let's bring everything back up again. So Docker Compose up, -- detach because we want them to run as background processes. And this remove orphans is just a bit of a safety net really. If you've somehow ended up with some containers that are still running that have been orphaned in the sense that nothing is associated with them, they're not really doing any good anymore, they're not needed, then pardon me, then they'll be removed. Those orphaned containers will be shut down. Okay, so you've been watching the video for 20 minutes now. We've gone through an awful lot of code, and I thought, well, we can't really end the video without testing this out and seeing it in action, can we? So let's make a very small change to the website, just enough to trigger the CI pipeline in GitLab, and then let's watch it do its thing and yeah, bask in just how clever this technology really is. Okay, so the change I thought we'd make is down at the bottom. This is on production, by the way. At the bottom of the Mindful Choices website, if I zoom in a little bit, you can see it says website by David Jones, and if you click that, it just takes you to my website. But David's my Sunday name, and let's say I wanted to make it a little more friendly, a little less formal. Let's change that to Dave Jones. I'm rebranding myself on the internet. So that's a very simple change we can make in the code, about as simple as they come. So here's the code that's responsible for that footer. Website by David Jones. Let's change that to Dave. And then let's quickly swap into the right directory. Okay, and this tool is called LazyGit, and it's an incredible tool. If you haven't used it, Google it and have a look. Here's the Git Diff, so you can see the red is what was there before, website by David Jones, and it's going, the green says what it is now, so website by Dave Jones. I like that change. I'm going to press spacebar to stage that change, and Shift C to commit. It opens my editor. Let's give it a little copy emoji and say change footer from David to Dave. Save, close. Okay, so now we can see we've got one commit here, which is red, and that's because it hasn't been pushed to GitLab. So I'm going to do Shift P. There you go, it's pushing. Hopefully it works. There we go, cool. So now, here we go. Here's the pipelines page on GitLab, and you can see that my change here, change footer from David to Dave, is running. These two dots here represent the two stages. So the build stage is running right now, and then the deploy stage has been created, but it doesn't run yet. The build stage needs to finish. And if we click into the build stage, we can see that Docker is doing its thing. So what we should see is all of the stuff in here and all of the stuff in here in the build stage happening. So here it's building the new version of the Rails app, and what's really cool about Docker, you see how it's saying using cache. There's an awful lot of lines there that said using cache, and that's because Docker is smart enough to realize the file system is in layers, and it's going, well, that layer hasn't changed and that layer hasn't changed, so the build process can be very quick. Here it is writing the assets for the Rails app, and look at that, job succeeded after 1 minute and 7 seconds. So now if we go back, the other stage should be running. Just reload this page. Yep, so the build stage is ticked, and now the deploy stage is running. So we'll go and take a look at that. So most of the wait time here is actually waiting for GitLab to start up the CI pipeline. Once it's going, it's very quick. And it's all kind of very meta as well, because GitLab are themselves running everything within Docker. So you've got Docker in Docker. It gets a bit confusing, but here you go. Yeah, so you can see we're pulling down the database and the app and the Nginx containers. We're running the changes to the database. We're stopping the app. Well, so we're just saying stop, and it's stopping the app. And then we've got said go up again, and it's saying the database hasn't changed. That's up to date. So's the Nginx, but we've recreated the Mindful app, the Rails app, because that had some new code in there. And again, after just 42 seconds, the job succeeded. So the moment of truth, if we go back to mindfulchoices.co.uk and reload, ta-da, website by Dave Jones. So yeah, that whole thing took about, 2 minutes from me pushing the code to GitLab to the actual website being updated, and I didn't have to do anything after I pushed the code. So yeah, CICD, amazing as a pattern for speeding things up and making your developer teams super productive. So I hope this was helpful, and I'll catch you again soon. Stay safe, everybody. Bye.